Hi, my name's Akua A. Boateng. I work in marketing, currently in the publishing industry, and I'm the co-founder and co-host of the Sankofa Book Club.
And my name is Melody. I am a podcaster by night, really, with Akua. But then during the day, I'm a postdoctoral researcher in chemistry.
Lovely. And you have already mentioned your podcast, the Sankofa Book Club.
Mm-hmm.
Would you care to introduce it a little bit, what it is about, what you do, where it came from, what you want to achieve with it?
Yeah, sure. So I worked on a marketing campaign using a podcast to promote a book, and I thought it was a really great idea. Started delving into podcasts and realised this was probably about 4 years ago, that there actually wasn't that much Black content in podcasting, and most of it was US. And so I was always just interested in starting something along those lines. And I was also going on a journey of reading more African literature and using that as a way to learn about history, culture. And so I just thought one day, why can't I just do them together? So I called Mel. I was like, hey, do you want to do it? And Mel said,
yeah. Literally.
Yeah, and I think we have different relationships with African literature, but we both see this going in the same direction.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're both concerned about, or passionate about, I should say, about the African and African diaspora narrative, making sure that people realise that the Black experience isn't monolithic, and to have an avenue to explore that with us. And so we use literature as an avenue for that.
Yeah.
Right. So what kinds of books have you discussed and read so far?
We've had a real mix. We try and read around the continent. It's like poetry, fiction, non-fiction,
short stories,
YA, long fiction, long. We've covered a diverse selection.
Oh, even
books.
Playwrights. Soon come.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
you heard it here first. So in terms of geography on the continent, are you going around the continent, or do you want to specialize in one particular area or country, or how do you go about it?
So we have a leaning towards West Africa because we're both Ghanaian, and there's just generally a lot more content coming from West Africa. But we do try and mix it up as much as possible. Yeah.
Cool. What role did literature play in your lives as adolescents or young adults?
I wouldn't dub myself as a reader back then, even though I did read some, so Noughts and Crosses, Harry Potter, Jacqueline Wilson. But I think now as an adult, I've become more of a reader, just as an avenue of like self-discovery.
Right. So your relationship with literature has changed over the years.
Yeah.
And it's become a means of self-discovery.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
I would say so.
So what has been your favorite book that you have discussed on the podcast so far? Mean question.
Yeah.
If you had to choose.
I would say I kind of want to change my mind now.
I've got a book in mind.
I was going to say I think I've changed my mind to Questions of Ada.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
So that was a poetry collection we read. I actually don't remember the writer's name, but we'll put it in the description.
Yeah.
And it was a brilliant body of work by this young woman. All the poems were about women, and I think particularly women in the diaspora and in West Africa. And the poems were really unique. It wasn't samey, which sometimes you experience when you read a single collection of poems because it's one author. But it was absolutely brilliant. I think it just helped me think about myself and my surroundings differently, and also learn about other people's experiences and how we deal with them in different cultures. Yeah.
How about you?
I was going to say The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives.
Oh, yeah. Good one.
Because I think it's the first time I've thought of polyamory, polygamous relationships. It's not something that I'm used to in the West or just in my family line. And just the curveball of how difficulties in conceiving can be down to the man sometimes. It's got nothing to do with the woman. How about that? Yeah.
So which book would you recommend to somebody who is trying to read more African literature, go on a journey through African literature? Which one would you recommend that they would start off with?
Should I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would suggest The Fisherman by Chigozie Obioma, because it's a really interesting story. There's lots of tension, keeps you on the edge of your seat. However, you still get to experience a different surrounding, different culture, different environment. But I guess that brotherly relationship is something that many people can identify with and is not limited to a geographical location or culture. And then also the fantasy element of it as well, something that you don't have to take too seriously and have too much context to understand, although there is definitely some context in play. But I think just that genre, how would you even categorize it? What genre would you put it in?
It's a bit like, I mean, there's Greek mythology influences in that, but then it's part of young adult fiction, I would say, as well.
I think you could just tell that story in any culture, really, but you still get a glimpse into Nigerian culture through it. Yeah.
So you like that, yeah?
Yeah.
All right. So you would say The Fisherman is something that people could start off with. And then after that, what would you say is another good book that is, something that could really get people into African literature?
What do you think?
I'll say a classic like Things Fall Apart.
Yeah.
Even though it was, I think my first-hand experience of it, I feel like I cheated myself from really getting the most out of it.
I'm so glad that's on camera.
Yeah.
I'm actually so
everyone
glad.
knows now. Yeah, I cheated myself.
You did not like that book.
I didn't. But that's because I was such a novice to the game.
Okay, fine. I'll allow it.
I didn't like it at the beginning.
Yeah. I just didn't like Okonkwo as well. He's just like this kind of man, and I don't like men like that. But anyway, that's besides the point. The themes that it draws upon, colonization, just the appreciation for tradition and culture and spirituality as well, and how the West came and their sort of influence and how they changed Nigeria from then on. I think is an important piece for someone to read.
What role do you think literature, both fiction and non-fiction, play in the emancipation of Africa as a continent with many countries and different cultures, of course, from the West, but also from the ruling classes that often force their own people to their knees? Do you think that even fiction and non-fiction can make a difference?
Absolutely. My experience is that I've enjoyed fiction more than non-fiction. And I think it's the beauty of just writing your story, telling your story and owning it as yours. The reason I got into African literature was, I guess, seeing myself and just reading a different narrative, experiencing something I could relate to more. For example, family dynamic. It's different in different cultures. So it just felt more natural reading it in African literature. But I think no matter where you live in the world, you experience a lot of Western culture. And that's not limited to the West. So I think the more we put ourselves out there, and even though the kinds of stories that we've published over time has changed, I think it's just really important to get our voices out there and people to recognize that there's always a different story to be told, and there's just no one way for YA to be, or fantasy, or rom-coms to be. I think just getting the African story out there is a part of that emancipation. And as much as non-fiction is informative, and you mentioned this earlier, knowledge is power, I think actually just being comfortable in our story and getting other people to be comfortable with it is what's important. Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I think it depends on where you lie on the spectrum of how you want to digest information. If you like it in a more accessible, easy format, fiction is your thing. If you like hard facts and information just to be fed at you in its rawest way, then non-fiction is there for you. But I would say play around with both, really, so that you have like a more wholesome perspective on the whole story.
Right. So this debate has been around for a long time, but I wanted to know what you two specifically think constitutes African literature. What is it?
Okay, so I think the biggest... I would say literature from an author of African descent. I'm no expert in what literature is because I know that's a part of the debate as well, and not all writing is considered literary. So I'm not even going to touch that. But I would say an author of African descent, because that then can include those of us who identify as African through the diaspora. Not everybody has had the chance to live in Africa. And there's also different lives that you can live. You know, like class is actually very well defined, and the story told, you know, from different perspectives can be, there's different Africa for everyone, really and truly. So I don't think it should be limited to setting in Africa, but I think the voice should be from somebody who identifies as African.
Yeah, same as me. Because I love Chigozie Obioma, Chimamanda. I also love Charlemagne. If he's watching this, hey. I mean, yeah. So I think so long as you're Black, that's my kind of signifier for that.
Right. Interesting. So the closeness and knowledge of a particular culture is not as important to you when it comes to defining what constitutes African literature. I'm asking because, example, slightly controversial, Marlon James's book, Red Leopard, Black Wolf, or the other way around, lots of people have heralded it as being African storytelling and being African fantasy or science fiction. What do they call it? Fantasy, right? But then lots of Africans who are on the continent and who have read it were like, no, this is not African at all. So what do you think about that?
There's enough beef in the world, man. Like, can we just relax? That's my perspective on it. I think if you are Black, like you have the platform to be able to share in that experience. But that might be because I'm like, I feel like I'm new to the space and it's a very individualistic pursuit. I'm not an expert in this at all. But yeah, there's bigger fish to fry. Can we just... Let's take a nap on that.
I have a different opinion.
Go on.
So
Tell us.
I think African literature can sit within Black literature, but not everything. Like Black, I think. Like
so, noughts and crosses would it be?
No, I don't consider that African lit at all.
All right.
But it's Black literature.
Okay.
So I think that's where the issue is. Actually, myself, what I would consider as what I've read as African literature, the authors are quite, they've done enough research and they don't refer to a single story. It's like multifaceted. It feeds into each other. So you know it's not like their single narrative. So I haven't read the book that you've used as an example, but I think anything that should actually represent African literature should reflect that. Even if that means like, oh, this is Nigerian literature, this is Ugandan literature. It should be well informed, not just get up and say, I went to Uganda once, I'm going to write a story about it. Because I did. But I definitely know that I couldn't write something that I could class as Ugandan literature. I've been to 4 other countries in Africa, so I would say that I could probably write a good piece of African literature. That was a bold claim. I'm not an author. but in terms of the research, the experience and the knowledge I would have, I would be more comfortable sitting in there.
Yeah, I hear that. The mic's dropped. I agree with you.
But how do you feel in this context about Children of Blood and Bone and Children of Virtue and Vengeance, for example?
I feel like, Orisha is quite representative of Nigeria. So I would class it as African literature.
I think so too. Because there's elements of it like the language. And I think it's quite clear, like, even if you didn't know that Orisha was like, it just looks,
culture, the jollof rice was mentioned.
Yeah,
there was
there's
so
many allusions.
Yeah.
Even though it's like in a fantasy world, it's clearly Nigeria. But I guess the fantasy allows you to make your own decision as well.
Right, so I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, 100%, it depends. But I don't think Tomi Adeyemi has been to Nigeria before. I don't know, do you know?
No, I'm not sure.
No, actually.
I know the book was influenced by South American culture.
Yeah.
That much, but...
Yeah. Right. So we're still a little bit up in the air with what constitutes African literature, right? So what role do you think African literature, whatever it means, we have like a baseline, at least you have to be Black and you have to have a certain understanding of the context. So if we work with that, what influence or what role do you think that kind of African literature plays to people who are of African descent and who are in the diaspora?
So when you say that kind of African literature, you just mean with the base of...
Well, we just discussed what we think
Black
is African
author,
literature, not somebody who is Swedish and who writes about a kingdom in, I don't know, Uganda.
Yeah, sure. I guess it's just to give you perspectives. The thing about, I can say this from a Black British perspective as a Ghanaian British person, our first interaction with the continent will be from home, family, friends, our communities in that way. But then I found that when I actually went to Ghana, there was just so much more to it. And Ghanaian culture can't be defined by our experience in London. I'm sure it's probably different in the Ghanaian community in other areas of the UK or Europe. But what happens in Ghana is actually authentically Ghanaian. And so I think in reading more African literature, you can feed into that. You might not necessarily have the opportunity to go to Ghana, but reading a story from somebody born and raised there, or, you know, with like setting there, or, you know, something that has a bit more information on there can actually add to your knowledge and experience, I think,
Man, I feel like that was, that's me, really. That's my life story. I would have to echo that, really. I think you use that to just, gain more access to a place probably that you can't just readily buy your ticket and go to as frequently or live there. So, I agree with you.